Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. One of the big financial trends in recent years has been the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early. A lot of the headlines focus on pretty sensational stories of people in their 30s and 40s retiring early and living off their savings. But FIRE is a lot broader than that, and it basically encompasses anybody who's considered retiring early, even if they're not quite sure how to do it. Remember, this is general information only. You should get professional advice before making any investment decisions. Dr. Paulo Costa is a senior behavioural economist at investment giant Vanguard and joins me this morning from the US. Paulo, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So tell me, you've done a lot of research into FIRE. Tell me about it. Why has it become so big in recent years?
I think the pandemic helped in some ways, with the evaluations, reevaluations about work-life balance. That's certainly one thing. I think from a financial professional standpoint, I actually find FIRE to be quite inspiring in the sense that, people are using what we do, which is finance and financial education, to really change their lives. And I find that actually quite beautiful. And I think the idea of empowering people to do what they want to do. So I think that's why it has been such a huge movement in the United States, in Europe, in Australia, because I think the idea is very easy to understand, right? If I save a little bit more, I may be able to retire earlier.
Okay, so is that what it's about? Saving a little bit more younger?
Yeah, so I would say a couple of things. One, it's really about having a solid investment strategy that takes into account, precisely how long you think you're going to be retired, having realistic assumptions about the returns you're going to have, and also, very importantly, having a very fair assumption of how much money you think you're going to spend in retirement, and also how you're going to withdraw the money. So even though it's a very simple idea, retiring early, it doesn't really mean that it's a simplistic movement. There is a lot here to be unpacked. But in the end of the day, I still think if you put in realistic goals and a solid investment strategy, I think, there is a good chance that investors, can achieve FIRE.
Okay, so before we get into the details of how to do it, who is doing it? Is it something that 40-year-olds are thinking about more than they did previously? What's the age cohort that's thinking about FIRE?
Yeah, so I think here there is a divide. There is what we see in the media and then what actually happens. I think what we see in the media, we like talking about the people who retire at age 30, age 29, but I think really this is a movement of people between ages, 40 to 55 that really decide to retire early because, they figured out they have enough saved, or really that they want to do something else in life. So, we talk about FIRE, financial independence, retire early. But there is a big segment of these investors that they're not really retiring early. They're just doing something else with their life. So they are maybe changing careers. And so what I find really interesting, counterintuitively, is really the financial independence piece of it. Because I think that's really the enabler of what comes after, which is whether you want to retire early or you want to do something else with your life. And I think, again, having the financial knowledge and learning about finance, because most of these people, they're not financial professionals. So getting that knowledge to go empower themselves to do it, I think is, again, quite beautiful.
Okay, so let's say someone decides that I would like to either retire early or change my circumstances in life at the age of 55, and they're a 40-year-old. Obviously, as you made it clear that they need a good, solid financial strategy, but is it also about having side hustles, about, earning extra money, about being more frugal in that 15 years than you were perhaps in the previous 15 years? Like, you must have to make a bit more of an effort, in a sense, to get there.
Certainly. And I think you're pointing out something that is extremely important, which is to have the appropriate assumptions in place. And so one thing that is very hard is for you to estimate how your life is going to change in, say, 10, 15, 20 years, whether you plan to have kids, you may have aging parents. So your circumstances may change. So you certainly need to take that into account. So I think what is really key, as you were saying, there are two ways to go about this, as you mentioned. One is to go the route of, getting additional income, right? Because to make the math work, if you just want to work fewer years and still achieve a retirement goal, you have to save more. The other way is to cut expenses. Cutting expenses is, I think, in some ways harder because there is only so much you can cut, right? In the end of the day, you still have to survive, and hopefully still get to enjoy life. In the end of the day, this is about achieving a goal, but I don't think it diminishes all the other goals you may have in life. So yes, there are these two ways of doing this. So basically, either you can save more or you can cut your expenses, or you can do both.
Stay with me, Paulo. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Vanguard senior behavioural economist, Dr. Paulo Costa. So what about the risks involved? Now, I have had a period of my life where I took a 12-month sabbatical, shall we say, and what I remember is it was fantastic to begin with, and I had been paid a redundancy payout. I had a lump of money, but you can really go through that money pretty quickly. Your mindset, I think, needs to change when you stop earning income.
Yeah, so I think you're right. I think retirement in general, not only FIRE, is a really big change in mindset, because one thing that we see in the research in general is the case of the investor that is so used to seeing their money grow over the accumulation phase. And when it comes to retirement, the moment when they have to withdraw some of their money, they freeze, right? Because they're not used to seeing the balance of their accounts going down. But I think you're right in the sense that it's a huge change in mindset for folks. And having a solid investment strategy in place is incredibly important. So in the US, the FIRE movement here used a guideline, what's called the 4% rule, which is basically the idea that you have to save 25 times the amount of money that you'd spend in a year in retirement. So what our Vanguard paper talks about is actually how that rule is actually flawed for the US investors, and how we can make FIRE actually a better, more robust alternative by, using some of the principles of investment success that Vanguard has championed to make FIRE more likely for these investors.
So it's not 4%. What is it? How many years savings do you need?
So what the 4% rule says is that 4% will work if you're going to be retired for 30 years. But if you're retiring early, then that's very much not the case, right? You're going to be retired for longer than that. We were just talking about someone that may be retired at age 30, age 40. So that person may be in retirement for 50, 60 years. So certainly, that rule wouldn't work. One thing that we talk about in the US by running the numbers is that instead of 4, something around 3 to 3.3% withdrawal would work.
Mm-hmm.
But one key thing that actually would help investors substantially, is actually having flexibility in the way that they spend the money in retirement. So what do I mean by that? So imagine that you work in a job that pays you end of year bonus, for example. Well, if the bonus is good this year, you spend a little bit more. If the bonus is not as good this year, you spend a little bit less. So now replace bonus with financial markets. So if the financial markets have done well this year, you get to spend a little bit more. If the financial markets are not doing so well this year, you spend a little bit less. So actually, by doing that, in the research we found, by adding this flexibility, investors can actually start their FIRE journey by withdrawing the 4%. And in the numbers that we have run, that gives you an 85% probability of success if you're in retirement for 50 years. So adding a little bit of flexibility to your plan, and really to most things in life, helps a lot. And here is one case of that. By adding the flexibility in the withdrawal amount, can really take you a long way.
Now, just before you go, Paulo Costa from Vanguard, you're also very interested in financial advice and the value of financial advice. We're constantly telling listeners on the podcast about the need to get professional advice before making investment decisions. You've looked at this around the world. How do we make financial advice more accessible, more affordable?
Yeah, so it is true that, advice can be expensive and it's not for everybody. So what Vanguard has done in that sense is that now we have started to talk about financial wellness to investors. And what that has allowed is that we are ramping up our education efforts to really help clients and really everybody, that's our mission, to give them the best chance for investment success. So expect to see more and more from us, financial wellness being delivered to really ramp up the efforts on financial education for the people who are not in a position to get advice yet. We will be sharing more and more tips on how to make everyone more likely to have not an investment success, but financial success. Because in the end of the day, to achieve our financial goals, it's important to be well educated, to know how we can get there.
I totally agree with that. Paulo, thank you very much for talking to Fear and Greed.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. This has been a pleasure.
That was Vanguard Senior Behavioural Economist, Dr. Paulo Costa. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Remember, this information is general in nature and you should seek professional advice before making any investment decisions. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.